What happens when you walk away from the path everyone expects of you? When you refuse to measure your worth by society's checklist, and instead choose to follow the trembling but undeniable call of your own heart. This question is not just philosophy. It is the story of one man, a young boy in 19th century Bengal who was born into comfort, wealth, and influence. A boy for whom the future was already scripted. Law, politics, prestige, and a secure place in society's eyes. A safe road, a proud road, the road his family wanted for him. But this boy Rabindranath Tagore was restless. While his brothers studied law and administration, he found himself scribbling lines of poetry in the margins of notebooks. While society imagined him in black coats and dusty offices, he sat by the window, listening to birds, letting melodies flow into his mind. It was not rebellion with anger. It was rebellion with beauty. And in choosing this path, he taught the world a lesson that still echoes today. When you follow the whisper inside, even if no one believes in you, the day may come when the world will stop and listen. 1. The weight of expectations in colonial Bengal. Expectations were heavy, almost suffocating. Families, like Tagore's, carried not only wealth, but also reputation. The sons of such families were not free to wander. They were meant to bring honor, to follow a pattern. Law, business, government, service. For Rabindranath, the path was clear. His father wanted him to study law in England, to return as a respected barrister, to carry the family name with pride. To many, this was the dream: security, respect, and status under the watchful eyes of society. But Tagore's spirit pulled him elsewhere. He would sit in the courtyards of Jorasanko Thakura Bari, his family home, gazing at the play of sunlight on leaves. Instead of reading legal codes, he filled his notebooks with verses, sketches, and songs. He felt that life was too vast to be confined in the narrow chambers of law. To his family, this was worrying. To society, it was foolish. Poetry was not a career. Music was not a livelihood. A boy who turned away from law risked becoming a disappointment. And yet, Tagore felt something stronger than fear. A quiet conviction that his calling was not in the courtrooms, but in the soul of art itself. Here lies the paradox of greatness. The world often demands conformity, but history remembers those who dared to be different. 2. The call of the inner voice. Every society has its rules, and every family has its hopes. Often, those hopes are built on fear. Fear of hunger, fear of failure, fear of what neighbors will whisper. In the Tagore household, the safest dream for a son was the courtroom, not the canvas. The office desk, not the poet's pen. But deep within Rabindranath, another voice spoke. Not loud, not demanding, just steady. It said, "You were not born to echo. You were born to sing." Psychologists today call this intrinsic motivation, the fire that burns not for approval or applause, but for the act itself. Studies show that people who follow this inner drive, more resilient. Tagore lived that truth long before research confirmed it. He could have chosen respectability. He could have lived a life of quiet comfort, remembered only as a son of a wealthy family. But instead, he chose the uncertain road of art. Think about that for a moment. How many of us ignore that whisper in our own lives? How many dreams have we buried just to satisfy expectations? Tagore didn't bury his. He watered it, even when people laughed. 3. The struggle against doubt, but choosing your own path, never comes without storms. Society laughed at Tagore's foolishness. Critics sneered at his early works. Some family members felt shame, believing he was wasting privilege on childish hobbies. And then came the nights of doubt. Tagore was human, after all. There were evenings when rejection hurt, when the silence after his words felt heavier than applause could ever be. There were mornings he wondered if his family had been right. This is the hidden side of greatness, not the awards, not the fame, but the quiet battle inside the heart, the decision again and again to keep going. Instead of surrendering, Tagore poured his soul deeper into his writing. He wrote of love, of freedom, of humanity itself. His poems were not mere words. They were mirrors reflecting the longings of an entire people. And slowly, something began to shift. What once looked like foolishness began to look like vision. Here lies a truth we often forget. The world laughs at new music until it learns how to dance to it. Tagore endured the laughter. He endured the loneliness because he knew that one day the whisper of his inner voice would be louder than the noise of the crowd. 4. The breakthrough, and then the world finally paused to listen. It was 1913 when Rabindranath Tagore's collection, Gitanjali, Song Offerings, reached readers far beyond Bengal. These were not just poems. They were prayers in disguise, love letters to the soul, verses that touched both the divine and the deeply human. When Gitanjali was translated into English, the Western literary world stood astonished. Here was a voice that spoke from the East, but resonated everywhere. A voice rooted in Indian soil, yet carrying a universal rhythm. That same year, Tagore received the Nobel Prize in Literature. He became the first Indian and the first non-European to be honored in this way. The boy once mocked for choosing poetry over law, now stood as the pride of a nation. The very path that society had called foolish became the bridge that carried India's spirit to the world stage. But here's the deeper point. The Nobel was not the victory. On those lonely nights when Tagore chose to write, despite doubt, despite criticism, despite fear, the prize was only the world's acknowledgement of a truth he had already lived. That authenticity eventually finds its audience. 5. The philosophy of his life. Tagore's life was never just about winning awards. His true achievement was proving a larger philosophy, that freedom of the soul is the foundation of creativity. He did not stop at writing poems. He composed songs, over 2,000 of them, many still sung across India today. He painted, he taught, he built Santina Keaton, an experimental school where learning happened under the open sky, not within suffocating classrooms. He lived as if every form of expression was simply another language of the spirit. Modern experts in creativity call this divergent thinking, the ability to step outside conventional lines and see new possibilities. But Tagore didn't need a term for it. He lived it. He refused to be caged by expectations, whether of family, society, or even tradition. His work carried both rebellion and reverence. Rebellion against narrow thinking, reverence for the vastness of life. What does this teach us? That true success is not about following the safest path, but about aligning your life with your essence. Many people achieve comfort. Few achieve fulfillment. Tagore chose fulfillment, and in doing so, gifted his art to the world. And that is why his story matters today. Not just as history, but as a living reminder that when you dare to follow your inner truth, you create something larger than yourself. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, what does this story have to do with you? Perhaps you're a student in a small town where the only dream people talk about is becoming a doctor or an engineer. Perhaps you're a worker in a crowded city, following a routine that feels safe but empty. Or perhaps you're someone who has quietly buried a passion for music, for art, for writing, for teaching, because you were told it was impractical. This is where Tagore's life speaks directly to us. His choice was not easy. He risked shame, rejection, and loneliness. But in refusing to silence his inner voice, he discovered not only his destiny, but also gave his nation and the world a new sound of freedom. You see, life is not about rejecting responsibility. It's about refusing to reject yourself. Tagore carried his duties, but he also carried his truth. And that balance is what we must learn. So ask yourself, what is the song inside me that I have ignored? What is the dream I have locked away because of fear? Because here's the truth. If you silence that inner voice completely, you may succeed in society's eyes, but you will fail in your own. Tagore once wrote, "Faith is the bird that feels the light and sings when the dawn is still dark." This line is not just poetry, it is philosophy. It tells us that the real measure of courage is not singing when the sun is high, but singing when the world is still asleep, when no one believes, when the darkness feels endless. That is faith. That is perseverance. That is Tagore's legacy. Think of it this way: the applause of the world is sweet, but temporary. The whisper of your own heart is quiet, but eternal. The world may laugh today, but tomorrow it may learn to sing your song. And that is why Tagore's story is not only about a Nobel Prize, it is about the victory of the soul. He proved that when you choose authenticity over approval, your life itself becomes a gift, not just for you, but for generations after you. So, if you are waiting for the world to encourage you before you start, remember this: the dawn doesn't wait for applause. It rises, and the world follows. Your dream, too, is waiting to rise. So, my friend, let me ask you one last question. Are you walking the road others have chosen for you, or the road your own heart longs to take? Rabindranath Tagore's life reminds us that greatness does not come from following the crowd. It comes from listening to that fragile, persistent voice within, and daring to honor it, even when the world calls you foolish. Maybe your dream is small in the eyes of others. Maybe it feels impossible right now. But remember, the dawn always begins with a single ray of light. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs courage today. Subscribe to Mindshift Stories for more modern parables that can change the way you see life. And never forget, when you dare to follow your inner song, the world may resist at first, but one day it will listen. Final thought: Tagore did not just win a Nobel Prize, he won the right to live as himself. And perhaps the next voice the world is waiting to hear is yours.